This character was so broken in One Punch Man that the creator had to nerf him and rewrite his whole existence in the manga. Throughout the series, there have been some insanely powerful monsters and heroes that we've had the joy of seeing in action. Powerful characters ranging from espers capable of lifting entire cities, and monsters that stretch out to be almost 100 miles long. All these crazy zany characters riddle One Punch Man and leave us pretty damn entertained from chapter to chapter. However, not only is One Punch Man known for its comedy and incredible art from Yusuke Murata, it's also known for its occasional heavy retcons and redraws. For those of you that don't know what that is, it's simply rewriting or redrawing the story or removing a certain aspect of it after the chapter has already been published. There are times where Murata simply doesn't like the way he drew certain scenes or chapters and simply touches them up for a better reading experience. On the other hand, there are also times where Murata and One go back to a chapter and completely redo it, usually in a way that it actually changes the story itself. The prime example of this is during Saitama's fight with Garou, where they completely removed the scene where Saitama and Garou were supposed to sit down and have this talk no jutsu session about why Garou hates heroes so much. They removed it and went right into the insane Cosmic Fear Garou stuff, and the old version never saw the light of day again in the official release. There's actually a good handful of people that don't even realize that first version ever existed. Whether they did this because a lot of fans were super pissed that it seemed like the fight was ending abruptly, or One simply didn't like it and decided to change it himself, is something we might not ever get an answer to. The reason is still a mystery. That being said, there's another major change that they made to a batch of chapters that many people don't know about, and the reason as to why they decided to rewrite them is a lot more clear in this particular case. It's a pretty simple one actually. The monster they created was way too broken and they needed to nerf him immediately. The monster in question, if you already haven't been able to guess it, is none other than Phoenix Man. Phoenix Man is one of the more interesting characters to follow in the story because not only was his character rewritten and redrawn to make him weaker, he also has a different fate at the end of his fight that indicates that he'll have a much larger role in the future of the manga than One originally intended. Oh, and full disclaimer too, Phoenix Man is generally just one of my favorite characters in the entire story, in the upper echelon for me. I mean, just look at this sick ass design and these insanely cool moves. You can just tell that Murata had a ton of fun drawing this character. I'm getting ahead of myself though. Let's break down everything we know about Phoenix Man, like his origins and all of his abilities as a monster, pretty much everything we know about him so far, and then get into the drastic changes that were made to him that made him so much weaker. Changes that, in my opinion, kept Phoenix Man from being on the level of the upper echelon of disaster level dragons with the likes of Platinum S and Sage Centipede. So let's get into it. Before becoming a monster, Phoenix Man was a regular guy that played a role in a kids TV show called Animal Kingdom. In the show, he played a character called Bird Brain or Dopey Bird, depending on the translation that you read, and wore the same costume we see him wear as a monster. In the show, his character was described as being dumb and happy, dying in various ways each episode, only to come back like nothing ever happened by the next one. Sounds a little familiar, doesn't it? Well, Phoenix Man loved his job and would have been content doing it for the rest of his life, but that's not how show business works. Eventually, the show was canceled for having too much dark humor, and Phoenix Man was therefore fired and tossed away pretty much like every time they try to reboot the Fantastic Four movies. They just can't ever get it right. Anyway, this firing was what kickstarted the negative emotions that began his monster transformation, because we gotta remember that monstrification happens when someone experiences a burst of negative emotions and undergoes a full-on mutation into a monster. He soon realized that his costume had fused with his body and could now communicate with him telepathically, turning him into the monster known as Phoenix Man. His original monster form is simply a guy wearing a bird costume. He can fly and attack his enemies with his bird beak, but all in all, he was only strong enough to be considered a weaker demon level monster, and was easily taken out by Child Emperor in their first meeting. Only after death is when his true abilities get realized. As Child Emperor and Waganma pass the corpse of Phoenix Man, his body begins glowing with a blinding light, revealing a new humanoid phoenix form. This version of Phoenix Man was Disaster Level Dragon, revealing his true ability is being able to resurrect every time he dies, with a much more powerful form and additional abilities every time he does so. In this new resurrected form, he can dish out powerful attacks like the Phoenix Explosion Beak attack that lets him break through most defenses with sheer power and speed. He's also been shown to be very intelligent and tactical, since he quickly deduced that Child Emperor's Brave Giant battle robot had a short time time limit before it ran out of power. One of the more interesting abilities that Phoenix Man gains in his new form is being able to project his inner psyche into this like metaphysical space that heavily slows down time in the real world and lets him communicate with other costume beings telepathically. It's kind of a domain expansion if you really think about it.
マジか。領域展開。
Well, not really, but kinda. Phoenix Man attributes this ability to shamans from long ago, shamans that would wear costumes and perform chants to communicate with the spirit world. Essentially, putting on the costume made them a medium to interact with spirits and everything else in the metaphysical space. But the list of random busted abilities does not end there. He also has various specialized forms that he calls modes that allow him to briefly give himself stat boost in certain areas. For example, he has a form called Prominence Hawk mode. This mode allows him to gain a massive boost in physical strength, on top of having his body burn constantly with intense heats of up to 10,000 degrees Celsius. He also has his Phoenix Fire Falcon mode, say that 5 times fast. That increases his speed dramatically, to the point that Brave Giant's sensors could hardly follow his movements. In this mode, he could also use the Phoenix Flare attack, which launches feathers that act as homing missiles that can lock onto and follow its targets. Finally, we have his Penguin mode that allows him to manipulate ice and make him a tougher target to hit. Dude can just bounce around in his little chubby penguin form. Those are a ton of forms, I know, but there's actually another super awesome form that he had in the original version of the manga, but we'll get to that in a second. His final completely insane ability is being able to use his own life force to reanimate corpses and create an army of mindless zombies that he could then take control of to attack his target. Mind you, this is all while being able to resurrect and become even stronger if all of these crazy abilities fail. All that being said, it's hard to imagine that there was an even more broken version of Phoenix Man, but that's the honest truth. In the original version of the manga, Phoenix Man had much of the same abilities he has now, minus the Phoenix Base and his Penguin mode. However, the abilities that he did have were super beefed up compared to his updated version. For starters, his Prominence Hawk mode still gave him enhanced strength and control over his extreme heat. That never changed. The major difference is that originally, this form actually allowed him to absorb energy and grow even stronger. We see this when Child Emperor and his baby Brave Giants hit Phoenix Man with simultaneous beams of energy, and he absorbs all of the energy emitted from the blasts and unleashes it back onto them. He essentially becomes a rechargeable battery. So in theory, the more you would attack him with energy-based attacks, the stronger he would get. Also, he was still able to resurrect the dead like he could in his updated version, but the original zombies he could create seemed to have a higher level of intelligence and mobility. Along with that, it seems that the reanimated corpses could use the abilities that they were able to use when they were alive. If Phoenix Man's reviving ability was like it originally was, he could in theory revive Monster King Orochi and use him as a pawn with all of his original powers. That's pretty damn nutty, right? That's not even the craziest thing though. What's probably the most massive nerf taken by Phoenix Man was the fact that One and Murata completely removed Phoenix Man's final form from the story, this being the Brilliant Eagle mode. This final form seemed to combine the boost that he gained from other modes, like Prominence Hawk and Falcon mode where he gained strength and speed, but brought those stat boosts to an even higher level. Most importantly, the amount of energy he could absorb at once seemed to hit a godly level on its own. Even Child Emperor's ultimate move, the Millennium Emperor Nova, was not enough to beat this new form. On the contrary, the energy from the massive blast that seemed to even stretch out into outer space was completely absorbed by Phoenix Man, causing his body to become slightly corrupted on one side. This was all in the original version of the manga. In the updated version, it seems they decided that this mode was way too broken and removed the Brilliant Eagle form altogether, along with Child Emperor's Millennium Emperor Nova. They even injected Saitama into the fight as a bystander, and even had him support Child Emperor in minor ways. So in a way, Child Emperor kind of got nerfed a little bit too, but definitely mostly Phoenix Man. The bright side of all these changes to Phoenix Man's character is that instead of having having his costume torn apart, which led him to lose all of his powers, he simply regresses to this weak little baby chicken form. In general, Phoenix Man was painted in a much more sympathetic light instead of being just straight up evil like he was in the original version, meaning that one likely has a plan to bring Phoenix Man back into the story, but on the good side this time, and fingers crossed might have just saved his most powerful Brilliant Eagle form for a later chapter. Regardless though, the immense potential that Phoenix Man has as a character in either versions of the manga is undeniable. He's essentially similar to Garou in the sense that he can become infinitely stronger every time he's defeated, and is one of the only characters in the entire story that you could honestly make the argument for being capable of reaching disaster level god heights of power. At the moment though, he's just a simple chick man helping school kids cross the street, and he's pretty happy with his life right now, so I'm happy for him too.
領域展開